Hey, Bob here. Today I'll be taking a look at the EC66 from Team Eclipse. This keyboard is essentially a rebranded Dakaro 66 but with unique custom keycaps and an unbeatable price of 90 USD for the full kit. It utilizes a 65% layout with a rotary encoder, south-facing hot swap sockets, wired, Bluetooth, and 2.4 GHz connections, PBT MDA profile keycaps, and quote-unquote gasket mounting. I was sent this board by Eclipse for review, however all my thoughts and opinions are completely independent. Before we move on, a word from our sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay offers everything you need for all your DIY tech projects. They offer PCB prototyping, manufacturing, assembly, and many other sub-services under these categories. In addition, they have advanced CNC and 3D printing capabilities, which I'll actually be taking a look at in a future video. Their website and ordering process is relatively straightforward, and their prices are very competitive. If you're interested to learn more, the link to their website will be in the description. Right, back to the video. Opening up the box, you're immediately greeted with the keyboard, which is held in place with a plastic cover and protected in a plastic bag. We'll come back to this in a moment. Underneath the keyboard is the user's manual, which goes over the keyboard's functions and shortcuts. The top compartment contains an assortment of accessories featuring a metal keychain charm with the Eclipse logo engraved, a braided USB-C cable, 2-in-1 switching keycap puller, a 2.4 GHz dongle, and finally, extra keycaps for Mac users. With that out of the way, we can take a closer look at the keyboard. I have mine in white pink, however they offer other color combinations as well. The knob is made of metal and color matched to your choice, a nice premium touch. As mentioned earlier, these keycaps are made of PBT and MDA profile. They're relatively thick and feel good. The die-sub printed legends are sharp, vibrant, and consistent throughout. This board uses a clip design, so no screws are visible on the exterior. I believe the case material is ABS and fairly sturdy with minimal flex. On the back, there are flip-out feet that allow for 3 different typing angles. Below is a switch that controls the connectivity modes. As you can see, it features per key RGB, which can be controlled via onboard shortcuts or software. Taking out a keycap and switch allows us to take a closer look at the sockets. It supports 5-pin switches with south-facing LEDs, which is a notable bonus considering it's rarely seen in this price range. As you saw, this board is using Gateron G Pro yellows, however they offer other switches from the G Pro series and TCC as well. The G Pro yellows use polycarbonate tops, palm stems, nylon housings, and 62-gram springs. They feature a polished stem and a heavy coat of factory lube, which drastically reduces scratchiness stock. I also wanted to mention that these have a unique stem compared to most other switches. Here's a stem of a milky yellow for comparison. I assume this was another way to reduce scratchiness stock, but from what I noticed, results in a dampened bottom out. Whether this is good or not depends on your preference. Overall, I'd say these are pretty good stock and passable to be used unmodded. Enough talk, here's a quick stock sound test. I'm actually pretty impressed with how it sounds stock. There's minimal scratchiness or spring ping, probably due to the factors mentioned before. The stabilizers can definitely be improved, but decent for something straight off the box. Having removed the keycaps, you can see that there's a healthy amount of lube in the stabilizers, which is something most pre-builds look over. Coming down, there seems to be some sort of silicone covering the spacebar. This results in a dampened sound, which I don't really like, so I'll be removing this later on. With the switches out, I do a quick bounce test, to which there is none. You'll see why in a bit. Opening up the board is relatively straightforward. I pried it open using guitar picks, but your hands should work just as well. Lifting the back cover up reveals that there is a cable connecting the battery to the PCB, so just be careful here. With that disconnected, here are the 3 main components of this board: bottom housing, top housing, and PCB assembly. Let's look at the bottom housing first. There is a nice dense sheet of Poron foam pre-installed. Removing that reveals the 2200 mAh battery, which according to Eclipse should last around 1 month with no RGB. In addition, we can see the gasket strips, which aren't the usual soft foam ones, rather stiff silicone tabs. This is one of the reasons why there is no bounce earlier. A second reason is this. For the top gaskets, there are thin extrusions next to where the tabs sit, which prevents full compression when a force is applied, as at a certain point, the plate comes in contact with the extrusion. The third reason is due to the standoffs in the middle of the case which support the PCB. Honestly, I have no idea why they would do this, as there's literally no need for them, but it is what it is, I guess. The fourth reason would be the lack of space in the bottom case, mainly due to its already shallow design being taken up by the recessed feet and battery. Moving on to the top case brings me on to my fifth reason. The inner part of the top case is as deep as the tab itself, eliminating its functionality. In addition, once the case is closed up, it fully compresses all the tabs, limiting any bounce at all. Coming to the final and biggest reason is the plate design. For some reason, the top and bottom edges curve inwards. Here's a diagram of what a typical gasket mounting system looks like. You can see that the plate only touches the gaskets and nothing else. This allows for the isolation of the PCB assembly from the case and all the other benefits gasket mounting provides. On the other hand, this diagram here represents the E66 gasket mounting system. As you can see, instead of the plate being in contact with the gaskets, the inward curves make it touch the case instead. This renders all the gaskets useless basically and results in none of the gasket mounting benefits. So the top row of gaskets are limited by the extrusions, while the bottom row is limited by the curved plate design. These two factors create hard contact between the plate and PCB, resulting in an abundance of structure-borne sound from the plastic case. I highly suggest you check out Keyboard's video on this, he explains it way better. Anyways, taking all this into account explains why I said quote-unquote gasket mounting at the beginning of the video. While on paper this is theoretically gasket mounted, in practice it's nothing like what you would expect. I'll try solving these issues later on, but for now I gotta say I'm a bit disappointed. Anyways, moving on to the PCB assembly, removing 6 screws allows everything to come free and reveals a dense layer of boron plate foam. With that out of the way, here's a more detailed look at the PCB. As mentioned, it uses a rotary encoder, perky RGB, and uses south-facing 5-pin hot swap sockets, aside from the top row. To fit the USB-C port onto the PCB, the top row sockets would have to be turned around, similar to older EC66 PCBs. They could have just made it so only the socket near the USB-C port was north-facing, but I guess it was just cheaper to flip the whole row instead. Not a big deal since there's usually no interference in the number row with any profiles anyways. Moving on, the rotary encoder, lights, and key maps can all be programmed using provided software. I'll link this in the description. Before I begin modding, I removed the stabilizer pads as they made the stabilizers feel mushy. With that being done, I cut out some PE foam to the PCB dimensions and applied 3 layers of the tape mod. Next, I moved on to mod the stabilizers. I believe these are some sort of Gateron plate mounted stabilizers and seem to be better than the usual black OEM ones. While taking them apart, I once again wanted to point out the excellent lube job done by the factory. I proceeded to clean everything off, clip the stems, wire balance, and re-loop the housings with 205 grade 0 and the wires with dielectric grease. I decided not to wholly mod this time as I was too lazy to deep clean the stems, but the other mods should be enough to get rid of any rattle. Before installing, I added thin strips of tape to the plate where the stabilizer sits to make sure they don't move around. After I installed some switches and keycaps to test them. Ayo, so future me here, I'm kinda too lazy to edit this part, so let's just say everything turned out well and move on. Everything sounds good, so I move on to looping the switches. And just like that, they're now looped. I wanted to mention that I only looped the springs with 105 grade 0 and the rest just simply used a brush and spread out the factory loop as there's already more than enough. Now as I said, the spacebar was pretty warped. No, you didn't because your lazy ass decided to skip that part. So future me back here, basically when I was testing out the stabilizers, I noticed that the spacebar that came with the kit was a bit warped. So for the time being, I just used a different spacebar for the testing and now I'm gonna deal with the issue. So yeah. To fix this, I heated some water to around 80 degrees Celsius. Pour it over the spacebar and let it sit in the water for 2 minutes. Afterwards, I take it out, place it on a flat surface, in this case my floor, and place 2 5 kg weights on either end. You can also use any other heavy objects. 15 minutes later, the spacebar is now flat and ready to be used again. With that done, I reassemble everything, install the keycaps, and here's the modded sound test. Compared to stock, these mods emphasized the sound and created a deeper, poppier tone. I was also really happy with how the stock stabilizers turned out. Right, so I assume this is where most people would be happy with the sound and stop modding. And although I do agree, it sounds amazing as it is right now. However, I wanted to take things further and bring the best out of this board. For those following, I wanted to give a heads up that these next few mods will void your warranty and may damage the board, so please proceed at your own risk. Taking apart everything once again, I start by removing those center standoffs mentioned earlier, along with the support walls. This will result in the case being more prone to flexing, however with the steel plate, I think it should be fine. With those removed, I cut out some Noiko dampener, which will help eliminate any hollowness, reduce the cheap case sound, and add some weight. Then I trim off the extrusions mentioned earlier using a pair of cutters. Afterwards, I proceed to file down the USB-C cutout to allow for more space in the case of flex. Once done, I replace the silicone tabs with D65 gaskets and reinstall the PCB assembly to test. While testing, I noticed that the area around the USB-C port had no movement as I had no support. So to fix this, I built a small tower using the silicone tabs from earlier and topped it off with a D65 gasket. Now that it's supported, you can see it being compressed. With all these mods complete, I put everything back together and here's the final sound test. Alright, so this thing sounds pretty hot. Compared to previous sound tests, it got higher pitched and more clear. This is mainly a result of the Noiko dampener and the case altercations, allowing the PCB to become more isolated. I personally enjoy this new sound and am happy with the results. If you're wondering if there's any more bounce now, there isn't. It's still hella stiff because of the inner edges of the top case and plate design mentioned earlier. To fix these issues, I would probably end up destroying the board, so I just left it as is. Did you really think that this would be one of my videos if I didn't destroy the keyboard? Yeah, so you see about that. So originally, I was just gonna give a summary of the keyboard and end the video here. After filming, I changed out the keycaps and switches to see if the sound could get any better. And although it did help, I still wasn't fully satisfied. I knew the board had a lot more potential if the gasket mounting issue could be fixed. So I kinda just said fuck it and decided to do it. I started by trimming off the inner edge of the top case with a pair of cutters, but then my big brain realized I could just use pliers and twist it off. Then I sanded it down so, I don't cut myself. What this did was create more space, meaning no more constant compression. Next part, I added additional gasket strips underneath the PCB, essentially creating 2 layers of cushioning. This effectively countered the curved plate design, eliminating any hard points of contact from before. After doing some tweaking here and there, I put everything together to test. The fuck? What the fuck? What the hell? Oh my god. What the fuck? So yeah, it turned out to be a huge success, and this is probably one of the bounciest boards I've had so far. One drawback was that the top case was now a bit loose since there's so much more free space, but it's very minimal and doesn't affect functionality, so I'm fine with that. Here's a sound test of the super modded build. Man, does this thing sound nice. In my opinion, these mods truly took the keyboard to the next level. With the PCB assembly so isolated, the overall sound has gotten a lot higher pitched and cleaner to the likes of more premium keyboards. I love the sound, but that's just my personal preference. Some of you may have liked the previous configurations better, and there's nothing wrong with that. So now that we're done with this small detour, let's get back to the original video. Alright, so my final thoughts. This keyboard is a big steal in my opinion. For only 90 USD, you're getting a complete kit with everything included. It sounds great stock and even better modded. With the price in mind, the only real complaint I have is the poor implementation of the gasket mounting system. While it is still better than cheap tray mount boards in my opinion, I feel like it was used as a marketing gimmick rather than actual functionality. They could have done a much better job. Other than that, this keyboard brings higher end features such as south-facing sockets, rotary encoder, and wireless connectivity down to a budget price. So I'm gonna say this once again, this keyboard is an amazing deal, and if you're a beginner getting into a hobby or just simply someone looking to get a nice pre-built on a budget, I highly suggest you check out the EC66.